Welcome to the NoDiceNoGlory.com Roundtable for HMGS CyberCon Redux. I'm your moderator, Phil Bolger, and I am joined today by Kevin Verssen, Sarah Verssen, and Chuck Siegert.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
We're going to speak to you about what's been happening at Dan Verssen Games, as well as what's coming up. Please make sure you turn your camera off and mute your microphone. If you have a question, please type it in the chat, and I will ask the speakers during Q&A. I will tell you, for this format, we're going to do running Q&A. So as soon as you have a question, as soon as we get a reasonable pause in conversation, I will make sure it's asked. But with that, without any further ado, let's go over to the Versens and to Chuck. So first, if you guys would like to just introduce yourself and what your job is at DVG.
Sure, let's start this off.
Hi, I'm Sarah Verssen. My job is basically a little bit of everything except the pure design of games.
I'm Kevin Verssen. I do a lot of the design and developing and playtesting, and I am oh so grateful that she takes care of a lot of the community management, because answering those emails every day is difficult for me, but easy for her. I don't know how she does it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chuck. My main job is to make Kevin and Sarah's life living hell. But otherwise, I am the designer of the new DVG game, Zero Leader. So my first game, and hopefully it'll be a great one.
Yeah.
And I'm your moderator, Phil Bolger. Unlike most moderators, I do actually have a connection to the company. I made a battle pack for Warfighter World War II about the Battle of Tarawa from the perspective of the Imperial Japanese. So with everybody introduced, let's talk about what has been going on at DVG. Where do we start? Since the age of the coronavirus hit us, what have you guys been doing?
Sarah and I finished, we created and designed and developed all mostly in-house the Air Leader series expansions, an expansion for Hornet Leader, Phantom Leader, and Israeli Air Force Leader that include new campaigns, adding skills to Hornet and Phantom, new skills to Israeli, as well as B-17. And so that was a really,
Brown did the B-17 one.
So that was a really fun expansion set for us to work on, because we just got to basically create stuff and talk with the community and ask, what are you guys interested in? What do you guys want in an expansion? We have a whole new set of counters that people have asked, little clerical counters of things like whether your aircraft is active this turn or not, whether they've taken a damage, if they're okay, shaken, or destroyed. And so little things like that just to help make the game a little bit easier for people to play.
And those are at the printer, and we expect them to be in stock before the end of the year.
Yeah.
And since that, I think Zero Leader was the next project, I think, after the Air Leader expansion. So we have Zero Leader. It's at the printer right now. We're waiting on the proofs. Yeah. We're waiting on proofs.
Waiting very patiently.
Yes.
Not.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about how, I had not ever worked with an outside designer to the extent that I had with you, Chuck, while we were making Zero. It was new ground for me, new ground for you. And it was about a year worth of work, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that you and Lee Smith approached me November or December of 2019 saying, we want to make Zero Leader.
Yep. Yeah, and I've been talking about it with Lee. He did B-25 Prince of the Skies. So him and I were talking about it, and I'm like, I really think a Zero Leader would be very cool. And I have spent forever, since I was a kid, World War II airplanes, especially the Pacific Theater. I've been spending a lot of time with that. So I thought, I might as well try that. And I remember our conversation. You're like, yeah, go ahead, do some research, see if you really want to do it. And I'm like, research? I'm ready to go. And then away we went. But spending the time, I appreciate the amount of time that you gave me, because I've never designed a game before, so I had a lot of questions. And I wanted to make sure it wasn't like the last 3 Star Wars movie. I wanted to make sure that I fit into the canon of the Air Leader series, which a lot of times was a pain in the butt. But I was able to, work with you and with Sarah so much and spend so much time together that it was great. It was an awesome experience. But we've been working on it for over a year to get it to this point.
Yeah. It Yeah, it was, what was really nice is just kind of working with you is how things were planned from the start of we had stepping stones laid out of here's the plan for 90% of the game. And you mostly had ideas of, I don't know how, but I want samurai spirit in the game. I want aggressive in the game. I don't know how I want it, but I want that stat on the airplanes. And then the phone calls of us making that happen really meant that you got to design. I then got to help like structure and refine your ideas, but pretty much all the ideas were yours. Everything outside of the leader system you created, and some of the things you really pushed for that led to a couple-hour phone call of me just like rubbing my head afterwards thinking, how do we make this thing happen? But it made the game better because of the extra effort that you and I both put in.
Yeah, it was, and honestly, it was much more like working with a friend than working with somebody else. You know, we'd have, okay, I've got 20 minutes that I can call you right now, which is why I kind of laugh when Phil says we've got a 50-minute hard line. Yeah, right, good luck with that. But anyway, you know, we'd call and, oh, we're going to spend 20 minutes. And 3.5 hours later, we would be done with the conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes we even got the reason why we started our conversation. We even got that done in that 3.5 hours. But a lot of times we'd go off on different tangents and get 3-4 things done before we even get back to that other one. It was a blast. It really was. I mean, it was a lot of work, no question about it.
Yeah.
But it was an absolute blast. And I loved the idea that you guys, when I would tell you your ideas, you didn't just giggle and say, yeah, you're an idiot. You actually helped me work them, helped me flesh them out because I knew what I wanted to do. And thanks to you, I was able to work together and make that happen. And I just hope the people who play Zero Leader can see the differences and can see what we did and how we made that work.
Well, then there's something beautiful about the synthesis of research and mechanics. When you're able to bring those two together and say, you know, I want something that I've read about, or, you know, I have Sakai's book in front of me right now, and it says that he was big on X, Y, Z. How do we get this into the game? And then the folks on the design side, or the development side, really, either help you refine it or directly give you a mechanic. To me, my favorite games that I've played historically really rely a lot on that synthesis, and it really sounds like Zero Leader has it, at least from everything I've seen. So I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think we worked together really, really well, and there were very few ideas that just wouldn't work. But for the most part, everything that I wanted to put into the game got into the game. Maybe not exactly as I initially proposed it because it just wasn't operational, but we got it in and we got it to work. And, you know, the rules making Zero Leader playable head-to-head versus Corsair Leader, I think are really, really cool. That was one of those situations where I had this idea and Kevin went, no. you can't do that. Why can't I do that? Because you can't. So we worked on it. We got it down to where I'm more than happy with it and he's happy with it. So yeah, the cooperation was amazing.
Yeah, it was, and something you had mentioned a few minutes ago, it was also fun of you would propose an idea of what if we were to include this in the game, and I would say in the game's current state, we can't really allow for that, but let's put a pin in that because it's a neat function. It's a cool mechanic players can play with. So let's keep designing the game, keep it in mind, and then 6 months later, I would look back through my notes and say, hey, you know those the minor damage things? Let's see if we can add those back in now that we have maintenance crews, now that we have thises and thatses, and now they can streamline right into the play session. And so it was nice that I enjoyed saying, this is a cool idea. It can't work now, but we can make it work later.
Right. And we did have a bunch of those. We had things we had to get done before we could do some of the more detailed and everything else. We needed to get that all done. And coming from the position that I came from, I had no idea what I didn't know. So, you know, it was awesome to have you guys say, time out, we need to do this first. Let's get this arranged. Let's get that arranged. So it was a lot of work, no question about it, but it was a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very happy we got it to where we got it. And like I said, I really, really hope that people who play it love it.
Yeah, me too. I hope that people enjoy the people who don't know their history at all will just be able to play it and enjoy it. People who do know their history will say, ah, that's why he has that special note in there, because in that battle, that specific thing happened a lot. And so other people will just read a note and say, oh, okay, I get a little positive. But people who know it are like, oh, they know what they're talking about here.
So that was actually something that came up on the Thursday night chat with David Thompson, who I see has joined us in the audience. He mentioned that he always likes to see, anything historical, put designer's notes in for why this is there. And that's something I've always appreciated about DVG is it's a simple way for folks that when they don't know the history, the words from the designer, Chuck in this case, saying, hey, this is really important to the Japanese. You walk away learning that from the game.
Yeah.
Right. And while I have not written up like David does, is amazing, but I have not written up designer notes for Zero Leader yet, but hey, there's plenty of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
No, it's just kind of on a side note, those companion books, though, people really, really enjoy them.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen some people just getting the companion books because they like getting a micro history lesson about the specific battle or the specific events around that battle. And they like the game, but they mostly just like, I don't want to have to read through 4 history books to get this information. I just want to know what happened to Castle Eater. And they can just flip through the books. So David Thompson, those companion books are excellent.
Yeah, they definitely are. And for somebody, I love history. So Castle Eater, I wasn't aware of what it was. The game looked cool and I started to play it and then I'm like, huh. And then he went back through his books and read what it was. And that just made the game that much richer. I really did enjoy it.
I think it's also a matter of sort of how do people learn. Everybody learns a little bit differently. There was actually a presentation this week at the Georgetown University Wargaming Society by a gentleman named Kevin Bertram, who works for a company called Fort Circle Games. And he talked about using games in education. I think you can go further than that and say everybody learns differently and everybody learns with time. Like for me, I was overjoyed last month when I discovered that there is a 3-part biography of Joseph Stalin, with each one being 1,000 pages, because that's exactly my jam. But I understand that some folks don't want to give up their nights and weekends reading about genocidal madmen. So instead, it's easier when they process it quicker. One of the things I've always joked about when people ask me about how do I learn about the history of the Cold War, and I tell them if you have 3 hours, watch Forrest Gump. If you have 5 minutes, listen to We Didn't Start the Fire. And that's not to say that this is, the overall compendiums of that era, but it's a place to start. I think games are really, really useful for that, for battles and for campaigns, which leads me around. One of the things I really appreciate is that, Chuck, I think the air war from the perspective of the Japanese is not well understood by Americans in general. And I think gamers know a little bit more about it, but to my knowledge, this is the first serious game focused around definitely tactical and to a lesser extent the operational challenges faced by the Japanese in the air domain.
Yeah, I agree. I've not ever seen any kind of game or anything like that. And quite honestly, getting the information was very difficult because everything about the war or whatever is written from an American or Allied point of view. So it's very difficult to get information about like the Japanese aces or whatever, where you may find a book written about American aces. The Japanese aces, you might find a paragraph here, or you might find a sentence there. So, there's a lot of information that's very hard to get, but it's there. You just have to dig it up. The idea of coming from the Japanese point of view, when I do the research, when I did the studying and doing all this kind of stuff, one thing I knew is that the Japanese were very, very proud. They were very good warriors. They were very good as people. They were very proud. They were doing their job. They were professionals. Okay. Just like the Americans, just like the Germans, just like the Russians, they were professionals. They were doing their job and away they went. Their equipment was awesome at the start of the war, but it got worse as the things went on because they just didn't have the technological capabilities that the US did. And that's reflected in the game. It's also, they didn't have the abilities and the parts availabilities and everything else that the Americans had. Take, for instance, Corsair Leader. If your airplane gets shot down, it's automatically replaced. No cost, no worries, no nothing. A new airplane shows up on the carrier deck and away you go. Not so true in Zero Leader. You have a limited number of airplanes that can show up, and they have to be prepared and sent out because the Japanese just didn't have this plethora of stuff, but they worked their full backsides off and made what they had work, which, you know, it makes you proud when you, even if you're not Japanese, but if you read and do this, it makes you proud of what they put up with and what they had to do just to go and do their country's bidding. And that was a pretty amazing thing as I was putting it together. But that's one of the reasons why I chose to do it from the Japanese point of view. I mean, as Kevin, I think, mentioned, there's tons of European games out there and all that kind of stuff, a lot of them from the German side, that kind of stuff. But there are none from the Japanese side, especially in the air war. And so I really, really wanted to do this. I wanted to do it right, and hopefully we succeeded.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that that means a bit to me, which is the idea of communicating perspectives, or what do people see. One of the things that I've thought of in the past and I've realized is a lot of folks have a very concrete idea in their mind of what was the Wehrmacht. You know, it's a very distinctive look. They act a certain way. They do certain things. I actually think they're kind of overhyped. That's a conversation for a different time. But they are very much ingrained as sort of the sneering evil Nazi in the American mind. Like, there's anybody that knows anything about World War II has an instant image of what they look like.
Right.
I found that even with folks that are pretty knowledgeable about World War II, that's not true of the Japanese. Like, I'll ask them if they've heard of various, you know, ground units or unusual types of airframes. And generally, if I'm not asking them about something that happened at the Battle of Midway, I get question marks. You know, what's a Rabull? And I need to emphasize, these aren't ignorant people. It just has to do with how it's communicated. Anyway, what I'm rambling to say is that I think it's worthwhile making games that put you in the tactical and operational shoes of the Japanese, because it helps explain why they behave the way they do, and why you have a nation that decides to pick a fight with America, a country that is, you know, 5 to 6 times larger with a much bigger industrial base and a much larger Navy. But when you look at the operational problems they had in 1941, it really does seem like if they pull the inside straight, they can pull it off. Although I would point out that their Total War Institute, which is their professional war gamers in the 30s, specifically told them every time in all scenarios the U.S. wins in the long run. So listen to your war gamers, guys.
Yeah, that's 100% true. But, you know, that is the case in 41. But for a couple things could have gone differently, because the Japanese at that point in time, we just brushed them off. They can't see. They're flying copies of our poor airplanes, and they're doing all this kind of stuff. They have no tactics. They have no nothing. Well, we got our faces rubbed in the dirt by them, because they turned out to be professionals flying some amazing aircraft. And they could have, like you said, pull it inside straight. They got awfully close to it. I mean, just imagine if the carriers would have been at Pearl Harbor, or a few other things would have happened at Midway or something like that. I mean, it could have been a whole lot different. But they needed to, you know, Yamamoto said, or not, Yamamoto said, we have to win now. If we don't win fast, we're not going to win, because just the weight of the Americans. I mean, suddenly you have 31 aircraft carriers in a task force. Japan, I don't think, built 31, period. So it's just the weight of the technology and the abilities and everything else of the U.S. They needed to pull that inside straight instantly, or they were going to be in a world of hurt. And it turns out they were in a world of hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we do have a bit of a limited time. I could go on for Imperial Japan about a long time. I'm sure Chuck can as well. But I do want to make sure we highlight some other stuff that DVG's been up to recently. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight was what I think is probably the most unusual warfighter to have yet hit crowdfunding, which was your most recent Warfighter Fantasy. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Warfighter Fantasy, we've been putting a lot of time and effort into it, because since the beginning, Dan wanted a system that could allow for swords, M1 carbines, M4 rifles, laser rifles, and plasma space goo guns to all function within the same system. And we made it work for modern day weapons, modern day hostiles. Those were fine. Thankfully, World War II, mostly the same. For fantasy, though, we've hit some roadblocks of how are we going to give people the same feeling of the same general mechanics and yet an entirely different context. And so we've been working really hard on overcoming those roadblocks, and we've overcome most of them. At this point, we have a tactical system of you moving around the dungeon, swinging your sword at orcs and sturges and goblins and dragons and stuff like that. All of that works perfectly fine. We're now working on the strategic side. That is, as you're moving around the world, how something new to Warfighter is the world reacting to you. And so as you move from town to town, some towns have dungeons so you can go in and clear out or whatever. But there's also the adversaries, and the adversaries are the big bads of the world, and they're trying to stop you from accomplishing your goals. And so that's the current system that we're working on, is how to make it cool and feel like, because I killed this adversary's child, you know, the big dragon, we killed the little baby dragon. This adversary is now personally going to come after us and make our lives more difficult until we kill them. And that's like, we have the mechanics for that, but right now we're just trying to make that a little bit extra spicy, a little bit extra cool.
Absolutely. I think the trick with anything is as big as Warfighter is to always make it feel unique and to give something to each version. So if that's the most recent Kickstarter, what's the next Kickstarter coming?
Next Kickstarter, Sarah?
Is David Thompson's Soldiers and Postmen's Uniform, launching on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be exciting. We're really excited for it. Every David Thompson game flies off our shelves faster than we can restock it. In fact, we just reprinted Pavlov's House by Stealth and Sea, and we're already sold out again. So
yeah,
we sold out in like 5 days. So we're reprinting it again too, and Cast Leader. We're really excited for it, and it'll do well, of course.
And the For What Remains games have been flying off the shelves too.
And by Stealth and Sea.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting is we see somebody will buy one game, you know, Blood on the Rails or something, and then 2 weeks later they'll buy Out of the Basement. And they'll just buy the others. And it's like, oh, okay, so they played one, they enjoyed the system, and then they said, I want more. And then they buy the dice pack, they buy the tiles pack, and some people just go all in. I want to get all 5 products at once. So yeah, For What Remains has been doing well. By Stealth and Sea has been flying off the shelves, reprinting Pavlov's and
Cast Leader.
And Cast Leader.
So we are ready for Soldiers and Postmen's Uniform to do the same.
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, we're starting to get some questions flowing in from the comments. So first, from Stephen Smith, he wanted to know, are you guys planning any new Napoleonic games?
We have, there are some plans for a Napoleonic expansion, for just some new mechanics and some new changes to the core system, kind of like what we did with Nimitz. There's also plans to have more Field Commander games of that era. And so those are both things that we're kind of looking at. The biggest problem that we have is Field Commander games require just hundreds of hours of research. And we, the 4 of us here at DVG aren't really looking to do hundreds of hours of research into that area. But we're always open for if other people want to come in and work with us and either co-design, develop, or just give us the research, and we pay them and give them credits in the rule book.
Yeah, research is definitely the most time-consuming part of every game, and we want to do it right. So I think that's, like Kevin said, been our biggest roadblock with expanding the Field Commanders or anything specifically in the Napoleonic era.
Excellent. So we also have from Eric S. He wanted to know, since zombies or pirates seem to be a requirement for every game company, do you have any plans for a historical pirate game?
I think zombies, pirates, and Cthulhu are the 3 requirements. But I mean, we could definitely make a Warfighter Pirates kind of game.
Well, we kind of did with that expansion, the Somali pirates.
Oh, well, that's where you play as Shadow War soldiers against pirates. I think he means more like playing as
pirates.
Captain Jack Sparrow kind of thing.
We could.
We very well could. The systems and mechanics are in place, and we can even have a more supernatural feel to it, as some pirate franchises kind of get into. And so we can have just standard, you're invading, British encampment kind of stuff, all the way up to you and your
Like
crewmates.
fantasy pirates.
Yeah, are all trying to get the sacred crystal skull or something, and you're trying to ward off the ghosts and the spirits and skeletons.
Okay,
that are
Indiana
holding it.
Jones. Chill.
Why not? Yeah.
But yeah, we could definitely do pirates.
Yeah. You want pirates? We'll add it to the list.
I think that's one of the nice things about the modularity of Warfighter is that if you want the fantastic elements, throw them in. If you don't have to. You can buy the system either way. And to me, that's the mark of an effective system when it comes to modularity.
Yeah.
So we have a question for Chuck from David Thompson. So no pressure. He wants to know what's next now that the design for Zero Leader is complete.
What's next, Chuck?
Right now is sleeping. Getting some rest after a long year of working. I've got two ideas that I'm working on right now. The main one that I'm working on right now, it's got a working name. I hope Kevin and Sarah are okay with this, but the working name is Jaeger Leader. It's kind of doing the same thing as Zero Leader, but now we're going to be Germans, the German pilots, and you're going to have the way I'm working on it. Again, this is even too early for Kevin to throw away, so I'm not even going to talk to him too good about it. But it's at the point where you'll choose your pilots throughout the entire war. You can go from 1939 all the way to 45, and you can choose what theater they're going to. They could go down into North Africa. They could be Poland. They could be France. There's going to be lots of different options. Any of those are going to have plenty of campaigns inside of them and everything else. So it's going to be, in my head, it's pretty cool. But we'll see what happens when Kevin and Sarah and Dan get at it.
Yeah.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah. And what's your other idea?
The other idea is the same thing, but from an English point of view, RAF leader.
Spitfire?
Yeah, Spitfire leader.
Yeah.
That's kind of an interesting idea that I was working on. They're probably getting worked on side by side, but Jaeger leader is more the lead-in right now, really because there's a lot more offensive and defensive capabilities, a lot more offensive and defensive things going on with the Germans versus with the British. But Spitfire leader is definitely out there also. But Jaeger leader right now is taking the lead of what I'm going to work on next.
So in addition to being Jaeger Leader, it's also Leader.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that'd be interesting. Playing from the Germans' perspective, mechanically it functioned pretty similarly to the other Leader games because they all need to fit within the same umbrella. But
Here we go with the cannon again.
The unique difficulties that the Germans face, that I'm willing to bet aren't normally talked about within games. And I think that'd be really fun to have.
Yeah, I do know of a few systems that replicate the German air war. They're more common than the Japanese air war, but it's still not seen a lot. It tends to be seen still in the context of the other stuff the Germans were doing.
Right. You've got games like Night Fighter Ace, Interceptor Ace, and they're fantastic games. They really are. But you're a single pilot going up against a stream of bombers or whatever it is. In the Leader series, obviously, you're commanding a squadron. And that's the whole idea of it. It's not just one pilot moving forward. It's your squadron. And if one of your veterans or whatever gets replaced by maybe a newbie or do something like that. So there's a lot of different options. And I do have one pretty serious break of the Leader canon that Kevin and I will discuss in one of those 20-minute, 3.5-hour conversations. But we've already discussed it, but on this one, it didn't work in Zero Leader, but I think in Jaeger Leader, I think we may be able to get that to work.
I have a feeling what you're talking about, and
I thought you might.
It'll be a little more than the 3.5-hour conversation, but we'll give it a try.
Yes, it's going to be one of those long discussions.
David, you're not helping.
Don't let him say no, Chuck. Stay strong.
Thanks for letting that cat out of the bag, Dave.
Yeah, I think a lot of our design time was spent with you presenting an idea, me saying yes, but. I try my best to never say, this is wrong, you cannot do this. But I said, we can't do it exactly. Yes, but.
Yeah,
So
see, that's where our 20-minute conversations became 3.5, because you'd say, no, that doesn't work with the leader theories. And then we would talk, maybe we can get it to work with the leader series. And yes, but, right?
yeah,
But
yes.
that we always start with no. And I've been married for more than 42 years, and I know that because that's where my wife and I, whatever conversation we do, starts with no, and then we move on to maybe. And so I'm used to it. I've got years of training for how to talk with you, Kevin. But I do like David Thompson's comment. Don't let him say no, Chuck. Stay strong.
Yeah.
I could also attest to the flexibility of the Versens when you ask them for something. I think we went through 3 different iterations of the signal flag card for Tarawa, and that was just insistence that, you know, for gear that the Japanese had and they made use of, they didn't have as much radio communications equipment as the U.S. did, so they relied heavily on signal flags, and I really wanted that in the game. We were nice though, and it doesn't make you a target for Marine artillery, which it probably should have.
Yeah.
So we have another question from the comment from George G. He wanted to know if there was going to be any possibility of a night bomber game like B-17 focused around the Lancaster.
I could see that. That would be more of a conversation for Dean Brown, and I could present it to him. He's right now deep in the trenches of Spruance-Leader. He's finishing that up, and so he's like fully dedicated onto that. However, afterwards, I think that people would really like that, and I think that he would enjoy taking the mechanics that he made in B-17 and tweaking them to give them a more nighttime bombing raid kind of feel. So yeah, I'll talk with him about that.
Terrific. Well, I could say I want to deviate and I want to go back because as Chuck can attest, I probably bugged him 5 or 6 times about, hey, are you going to put weird niche thing X into 0 Leader? So I've already got one of those for Jaeger Leader. What would you think about a box on the Spanish Civil War and the air war over Spain?
No. Oh wait, that's Kevin's job. Actually, already thinking expansion. Spanish Civil War expansion, everything else would be where your pilot could gain some experience, both in the fighter area and also in the ground support area, where the Germans were really big. So, yes, the idea would be with Jaeger Leader, there would conceivably be an expansion for the Spanish Civil War.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that's another conflict that it's not gamed very much. But at the time, it was really everybody in the military analysis world was taking close notes because they realized this is what warfare looks like right now. And there was huge debate because what was happening in Spain was not playing out in accordance with some of the doctrine of some of the major powers that had built more evolutionary off of World War I. So I always like seeing that one get to table just because there's only a handful of conflicts in between 1918 and 1939 that really have the sort of revolutionary technologies at the time on display. So that's another one of my, I guess, pet projects. One thing I would also add for what Chuck has had to deal with, I bugged him probably 6 or 7 times about, hey, what's the full list of aircraft in 0 Leader? How many? And I got to tell you, I was blown away. He included everything that I was aware the Japanese flew and some stuff that I wasn't aware they flew at all. And I think Chuck, you mentioned you even found like a record of an Emily ace, or there's an elite Emily card. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have an Emily ace. It was very difficult for him to become he didn't really become an ace in an Emily, but he became very well known for his reconnaissance and different kinds of things and everything else. So he just fit into an Emily perfectly. But yeah, it was pretty amazing that I found somebody for that airplane. I believe we've got an ace for every type of airplane that's in the game. So there's at least one ace for every type of airplane, including the guy who flew the Kates, who led the Kates and everything else. He's an ace in a Kate, and the guy who led the Vels in this at Pearl Harbor and that kind of stuff, they're in there as aces and everything else. There were a couple airplanes, obviously, that I couldn't get in. I tried to draw the line, you know, if only a few hundred of them got in or a couple hundred of them got in at the end of the war or whatever, or there wasn't really a major uptick in, you know, the technology or anything like that. You know, I tried to keep some sort of limit on the number of aircraft, but I'm pretty happy with the number of aircraft we've got in there. And thanks to the maneuver and robustness stats, every one of them flies differently. So if you have the exact same pilot in a 0 and that same pilot is flying a B6N or whatever, it's going to fly differently. And that was one of the key things. So every one of those aircraft is different.
I think that's impressive to me, because it's always difficult to make similarly statted aircraft differently statted within a game system. I know that sounds kind of like nonsense, but bear with me here. In World War II, there's a lot of aircraft that were similar. They had similar armaments, they were similar size, but they had something that made them different. To me, that's why I was really fascinated by the idea of the robustness and maneuver categories, because that is distinctively Japanese. You know, Japanese naval aviation at the beginning of the war was better armed, and it was much more maneuverable than just about any other countries, but they were fragile. Like if you could manage to land a hit on a 0, you would tear it up. So they planned on don't get hit.
Yeah, that was the whole idea. Their maneuverability, their range, because you know a 0 fighter could fly, you know, 3-4 days before it had to come down. And I'm exaggerating, but I mean, like the 0 had huge range and everything else. But you're right. Especially the Americans who were flying with 6 and sometimes 8 50 caliber machine guns. If you were a Japanese pilot and you got in front of an airplane like that, it was DOA. You were done. You don't want to do that. But with their maneuverability, it was very difficult for the American pilots to get around behind them. And you know, you see that when you play 0 Leader versus Corsair Leader, and you can see that the Japanese can really maneuver, but you don't want to get shot at. So it just makes it that much more fun, I think. But
yeah. And something also is, in the past with our leader games, we've had the pilot's stat block of what their stress is, what their air-to-air, their air-to-ground, their cool, situational awareness, whatever. That would be unique per card. We then had the munitions that aircraft could carry, and that would be unique per aircraft. So you may look at 2 pilots and say their stats are pretty similar, but this guy has the munitions that I want, so I'm going to take this airplane. Now, though, we have the maneuvering robustness and the munitions tied in. And so now you may say, this guy can carry more bombs, but I really don't like that I have to pay SO to get him. Or he can carry more bombs, but his maneuvering and robustness is worse. So he's going to have a harder time spinning around. And if anybody lines a bead on him, he's just going to explode. And so I'll take the guy that doesn't have as many munitions, the aircraft with as many munitions, in order to have the better robustness and maneuvering. Because if I get shot, I don't want it to be that bad, and I'm willing to put myself at a slight disadvantage in order to get the advantage there.
Yeah, and I also added aggressiveness to the pilots.
Yeah.
So now you've got some pilots that are going to press the attack, or you know they might tear a wing off, but they're going to push the envelope of that maneuverability of that airplane. So you've got just a few little stats that can change how an aircraft flies and how you fly that aircraft. And I really think it works out beautifully. Just these simple little things added to it that just make it really, really cool. But, you know, I might be slightly biased, but I doubt it.
Just a little bit.
Well, something I thought that was interesting is some of the community interaction that I've witnessed with 0 Leader. One of the things that I immediately think of is there was one of the playthroughs you showed that through a combination of smart play and good fortune, you managed to down 3 B-29s. And there was a guy in the comment that said, you know, how'd you do this? This is not historical. That never happened. And I think you and I have read the same books, because I pulled up the page that yeah, it did. It was in between Okinawa and the Southern Islands. It was rare, but it was not impossible. I bring that up to ask, how did you hedge the realism for what felt right for the Japanese planes? Did you go back and compare individual engagements? Did you look at kill ratios, or did you read testimony from certain aces?
This was a lot of our conversations.
Yes.
Him saying, this is a historical thing, me saying, but this is a game thing. How do we find the middle ground here?
Yeah, I rolled a D10 an awful lot and just took whatever random results showed up. It worked for me. No, honestly, I liken it to like a razor blade, and you can fall off one side and be perfectly historically accurate and completely unplayable, or you can fall off the other side and have a really, really playable game that anybody who knows anything is going to look at and go, I'm not going to play this game. That's incredibly stupid. So Kevin and I were really walking this razor blade, and it's amazing the melees we had on the edge of this razor blade, and neither one of us fell off, I think. DVG games and the Leader series are not meant to be historical tomes. They're not meant to be, every detail is exact. I learned that right away with Corsair Leader when Kevin sent me a mock-up of my card. Him and I had this conversation before they made that a goal on Kickstarter. He sent me a thing of my card, and I sent him back a note going, well, the F4F only had 6 machine guns, and you've got guns 8 down there. And well, he had to explain what that was. But again, if you're looking for something that is so historically accurate that it's not possible to knock down 3 B-29s, which again happened. I mean, there were a lot of people who became multiple aces knocking down B-29 bombers. But if you're going to be that kind of situation, maybe this game isn't going to work for you, because you'll just get freaky we had conversations about the paint jobs on the Zero on the box, that it was too white and too, all this kind of stuff. So, in my model railroading, we call them rivet counters, and they're amazing. They can tell you, and they're great sources for information. But when you're doing a game, you've got to draw that line somewhere. And I think we drew the line pretty good. I think we've got a very historically accurate game that doesn't get into the weeds so deep that you've got to spend 3 months learning the rules before you can play the stupid game. But yet it's not so frivolous that it just, this doesn't matter. You know what I mean? And again, that's where all of the additional stats, both on the pilots and on the aircraft, that's where all these additional stats came in. And then adding the mechanics of the maintenance crews and doing that kind of stuff. Again, a small thing, but it makes it historically accurate. The Japanese couldn't just replace every airplane that got shot down, and they couldn't just, always get the very best airplanes and just fly them. With Corsair Leader, you can fly an 8 airplane mission. It doesn't matter. Well, in Zero Leader, you fly an 8 airplane mission. Now you've got to know you've got 8 aircraft that you have to maintain to fly again tomorrow. That's if none of them get damaged or anything like that. You've got 8 airplanes that you've got to maintain. Do you have the crews to do it? If you don't, maybe you only send 6 aircraft on this mission. Those are decisions you don't have to make when you're an American, but you had to make when you were Japanese.
I would also argue that on a note from before, that we had to draw the line of what is fun to play and what is historical. And in some cases, we edged more on the what is fun to play. However, as I brought up at the start of this call, we had campaign notes that were specifically put in there because during this campaign, there were more or fewer F6Fs flying around, just doing close air patrol or whatever. And so people would say, yeah, you took a historical thing, shifted it more towards game, but also somebody here did a lot of research and knew the fine little differences between this campaign and the campaign that happened in the same area a year later. And so hopefully people will then be more willing to extend a hand over the bridge and say, you didn't get everything historically perfectly accurate, but you did know your research, so therefore I'm more okay with it.
Yeah, exactly right. One of those big areas was the crossover rules from Corsair or Zero Leader versus Corsair Leader. Okay. I had amazing rules, totally unplayable, but they were amazing. Okay. And Kevin's like, yeah, no. So we did. How long were we on that phone conversation? We had quite the conversation.
It was a couple of days
to make it far more playable. And I admit, I got done with that conversation and I walked upstairs to my wife and went, Kevin.
I can hear that in your voice.
When I sat and I thought back on it, I'm like, that's smart. That makes it, yes, now people will actually play this game. And that's exactly it. That's one of those melees we had on the edge of a razor blade, and neither one of us fell off. And I think it turned out great.
Yeah.
I would say from where I sit as a consumer, by the way, that perfection is not possible.
Right.
The 100% historically realistic game will be totally unfun to play. It's called Campaign for North Africa. It's been out for 40 years, and you have to calculate everything to the nth degree, and it's awful. So you have to make abstractions when you have one person in charge of a squadron worth of aircraft, which is functionally what a leader game is. What I would add, though, is that I think that you can still learn historical lessons, and that's what I appreciate about hearing about good research. Learning historical lessons like, wow, maintenance was a pain in the butt for the Japanese is valuable for people that have no idea how that works. So we are in the last 3 minutes. I do want to ask any final questions. I've got one from Eric S. right now. So he says Down in Flames is one of his favorite DVG games because it's easy to pick up even with non-gamer spouses. Are there any more easy setup, easy to play games coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I don't think so, because I'm thinking like if you're calling Down in Flames, and easy to set up, easy to play, in my mind that's like 5 minutes set up, 30 minutes to play, 5 minutes to tear down. Warfighter is probably double to triple that. Zero's probably double to triple that.
Honestly, as a company, we've discovered that those less historically accurate games don't sell as well and aren't as popular. I mean, Down in Flames has been pretty popular, but anything else in that spectrum hasn't been. And so we're kind of starting to walk away from that more, focusing on Warfighter, Leader, Field Commander, and David Thompson.
Yeah, so it's something that it's something we keep in the back of our minds. Normally, like with outside designers, somebody will approach us and say, I have a cool game idea. It's super easy, super simple. There's a guy actually who I'm in communication with, and he's making a tank battles game. And so that's something that looked a whole lot more simple to play and yet was complex in like the decision making and stuff. So him and I are going back and forth on that, but as that progresses, we'll make updates about that. So that may more fit what you're looking for, Eric.
And I love the Down in Flames, especially like Locked On. When I'm at a game convention demonstrating, I typically have that set up because people can learn that super, super fast. That and Corsair Leader, but we'll play a game of Locked On and they'll buy the game. And the last convention I was at, I sold every one of my new ones, and I had to sell my own personal one with all of the aircraft from BGG and everything else that I had downloaded and printed in the whole shoot match. I had to sell that because the guy wouldn't let me not sell it to him. So I understand where Eric is coming from. It is a very easy, simple game that's relatively quick to play. Corsair Leader is the same thing. Once you get the hang of it, Corsair Leader literally takes longer to set up, and it doesn't take that long to set up. It takes longer to set up than it does to play. It's really amazing, and Zero Leader hopefully will be the same thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. We are at our time limit. I just want to say that NoDiceNoGlory.com and the Historical Miniature Gaming Society would like to thank Chuck Siegert and the Versens for their time today.
Thank you.
The video for this session will be posted on YouTube probably about 30 minutes to an hour after it's completed. You can also visit the NoDiceNoGlory.com message boards to continue the conversation. Thank you very much for joining us this session.
Thanks for asking me. Kevin, Sarah, see you guys later. Phil, thanks.
Talk to you later, Chuck.
Take care.
Yep.